takes place in the town of Bourg La Run in France. We'll be running an awesome collection of games as fast as possible all weekend long, with dozens of players gathered together as one community to accomplish this. If you're watching this a little bit late on a VOD, or if you missed the telethon, but still wish to donate, you can still do so all year round on the AFM site, where you can sign up for monthly donations. More information is on their website. Search for AFM Telethon or go to afm-telethon.com. There's an English version of their website as well, if French is not your primary language. So it looks like we're just getting set up here. As with the PC port of NieR Automata, Square Enix did a very good job on the game itself, but unfortunately, the PC port suffers a little bit in terms of some resolution issues. But overall, it's a very nice experience and a very good run on top of that. So I highly recommend checking it out. I think we're just waiting for maybe just a minute until they start. So Gusia right now is just setting up his controls. What's very nice about NieR Automata and what Platinum and Square Enix have brought to us is the very customizable controls, in that a lot of the tricks that we use throughout the run are very adaptable to whichever control scheme that you like. The reason why we run in Japanese here is for the purposes of loading screens, at least in real time. It takes a certain amount of text to be displayed on each loading screen. So in Japanese, if the text is all condensed into fewer characters, then the loading screens obviously occupy less time.
We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending cycle.
Now, some of you may remember this being showcased at SGDQ, run by Half Coordinated. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with NieR Automata, the game design is very unique in the way that it fluidly changes between all these different perspectives of top-down, mech unit, fighting, to twin stick, shooting, to 3D combat. It's a very unique experience in the game.
Once you reach their anti-air defenses, proceed to manual attack formation. Then destroy the Goliath-class unit by any means necessary, and gather what data you can.
So this beginning section is a little bit of an auto-scroller. We're just waiting here for our teammates to get obliterated by these lasers.
Already engaged. Free movement unlocked.
Origin point of long-range lasers confirmed.
So we're purposely taking damage here to get rid of items in our inventory, just for quick optimizations for when we need to use items in our quick inventory.
Alert. Enemy unit sighted ahead.
Requesting permission to engage. Permission granted.
Down.
So, in this opening shmup here,
Assuming captain's duty.
it's very optimized in terms of some of the enemies that we need to kill. All these patterns are the same every time, so throughout each run, we can always remember the timing of which these enemies spawn, and a little bit of AI manipulation
Requesting permission to assume mobile configuration.
just to kill these enemies faster, so that way the preceding rounds spawn in faster. Here, we're switching down to a top-down twin stick style, where we get to use our melee attacks and our ranged attack here. Again, trying to kill these enemies as quickly as possible.
Captain, I think 4B down. 2B to Operator 6-0. All allied units down. The operation is compromised. Awaiting further orders. Operator to 2B. We need you to rendezvous with Unit 9S and begin gathering data on the local terrain. Understood.
But Square Enix certainly did a good job. Square Enix and Platinum Games certainly did a good job with NieR Automata. It's almost undeniable that the music in this game is an amazing work of art. And if you haven't played NieR Automata for yourself, I highly recommend it. It's an awesome experience, very mind-bending, and very existential. There's a good mix of things, casually and in the speedrun as well. But I highly recommend, if you haven't checked out NieR Automata, please do. So, this is one of the special enemies, these spinning robots that has these 4 nodes on the ends of it. And unfortunately, Gusia wasn't able to kill it fast enough.
Large enemy group detected.
As we slam into this wall, we transition into the 3D experience. So, again, this is very combat-oriented, so a lot of these waves will spawn in once we clear the first wave of enemies, and that leads to the next one. So a lot of these waves are very combat-based. The exploit that we see Gutsy using is called a damage glitch, and for some strange reason, when we perform a dash movement and a heavy attack with our sword, we end up throwing out the sword, dealing about 4.5 times the standard amount of damage, which is completely unheard of in the standard casual play. A lot of these sections would take significantly longer without this exploit, and we'll be seeing more and more development on this damage glitch, as we refer to it, throughout the run. So that first boss that we saw was called Marks. He's the first one we'll be seeing. There's a couple of them in this prologue section. The trick that Gusia is trying to do now is called Crane Skip, where we're trying to circumvent a little bit of the map geometry here. Instead of shooting down that bridge that we're supposed to cross, he
What is it?
I was going to send
uses a
you
lot of the movement tech that's been developed over time to scale on top of that bridge and then get on top of this crane, thus getting into Silo 2 here.
Nothing's ever easy.
So we're facing another wave of enemies here. Lots of different flyers as well. These guys have ranged attacks and are rather mobile, despite how slow and moving they are. And we're coming up here to one of the more gatekeeper tricks in the prologue, the infamous bridge skip.
You know, ma'am, I'm glad you're here.
Why?
Scanners like me.
It's a rather difficult trick.
Scouting out enemy
What we're
lines
able to
and
do
all that,
is
usually get a partner.
chain together a number of our attacks in order to gain a significant amount of height,
Stop calling me ma'am.
Huh?
It's unnecessary.
and very nice.
2B it is.
Took him a couple of attempts, but still rather clean. And as we go through the factory in here, oop, he's getting stuck on the wall there. As we go through this part of the factory, there's a tiny little hole that we can escape the playable area from, and we can just, instead of going and facing all these enemies, we can just run right through the area,
I know.
completely untouched. So again, this prologue section is rather monotonous, but also very predictable in terms of the enemy spawns as well. And the move that you see Gusia charging up there is a pod program, the little machine that hovers over
I
over
surveyed the entire factory,
2B's
but
shoulder
anything resembling our town.
is
Maybe they
called the pod,
moved
and
somewhere?
we have this ability to shoot this laser program out from our little Gatling gun at our shoulder. So we can utilize that to get multiple combos throughout each of those silos to
Should we check it out?
make those sections go a little bit faster.
It's not like command to get a location wrong. I guess even they get bad intel from time to time, huh?
And those of us who are skilled enough to chain together multiple kills in those silo sections,
High-power jamming.
at least using the laser
Response from
and a lot of other techniques,
Doesn't matter. I'll just take them.
takes a bit of practice as well. Here we're facing Marks 2 because there's two of them. At least we only need to fight one of them. So there is a strategy here of not having to take a damage up, but Gusia opted to take the damage up anyway. So what he's able to do there is throw together these damage glitches, and in between, during the waiting period, throw a light attack with his big sword, just to add in some extra damage. So this big guy here is called Engels. He is probably well, he's another gatekeeper of the prologue. His RNG in attacks vary in the speed at which they go off. So the attack that we just saw was called the clap, and this attack that we're seeing here is sort of these karate chops, and these karate chop attacks occupy a lot of time, and unfortunately, or fortunately, for this first section when we first encounter him, it's all about damaging him and trying to get him to a threshold, all the while listening for the music that will trigger the next section. This entire portion, about a minute or so, just occupies having to damage Engels. Now, fortunately, in this section, Gusia got good RNG from Engels. So, because the attack is shorter, we're able to progress through the prologue faster, because we're not having to wait for Engels to finish just a ridiculously long attack, known as punches, that has killed many a run. So this portion here is a little bit of an auto-scroller. We're just waiting for Engels to break through the bridge and chase us, but we're a lot more mobile. Gusia has opted to showcase some of the swag movement here in getting on top of this pipe. As you can see, normally we aren't supposed to be at the very end of this bridge, but why not? As in most games, walls in NieR Automata are merely suggestions.
Detected. No response to communications.
So now that Engels has broken down on the bridge, we're able to scale Engels to get to the very top to help our ally. It's a very quick movement to the top of Engels here. What he performed on the stairs was called a double lift, where normally we're able to perform only one lift per jump, or jump string, but if we climb an incline at the precise timing, we can cause the game to trick itself into thinking that there's flat ground beneath the character and perform another lift mid-air to gain more height. There are a couple strategies of getting up that staircase, but performing a double lift is by far the fastest. Now we're fighting in our mech suit here, trying to defeat this oil rig machine that we've been fighting. As 9S blabbers on about trying to fight Engels from inside his circuitry and disarm him. The idea here is that we're waiting for a certain attack to happen. Unfortunately, Gusia didn't get it to happen at the precise timing. We're waiting for that dialogue of 2B and 9S to finish, so that way Engels can do this particular attack that causes the so-called story punch that triggers the rest of this section, and we're coming up on the end of the prologue pretty soon here.
Affirmative. Infiltrating enemy subunit. Behavior table adjusted. Balance controls overridden. Enemy unit
So,
subjugation complete.
looks like you're missing an arm there, Engels. That must have hurt. So now that we've defeated the prologue, we get sent back up to space, and miraculously our memories as an android are intact as we get sent back up to the space station that's sort of like a hub. It houses sort of the command center of the organization known as Yorha in the story. Again, the setting in Japanese is for the purposes of faster loading screens. So these loading screens have to display a certain amount of text in order to go through the remaining time that the loading screen occupies. And if we can reduce the amount of time that loading screen takes, then all the better. What you saw there was literal system setup where the game takes you through to set voice volumes and game volumes and a little ability called self-destruct that we all love. You'll get to see that later. Ooh, unfortunately, Gusia tried going for a little strategy here that involves talking with our partner, 9S, and that when he brings up a dialogue box, we're able to skip sections of dialogue in the world to advance a little faster. Unfortunately, 9S is a little stingy when coming out of 2B's room. He likes to smell her extra clothes in her room. I don't know. He gets hung up on walls a lot. So we're just making our way through the bunker here into the hangar. And we're flying down to the surface again. So you could sort of see how a lot of these game systems intermingle with each other and how it's rather fluid in the way that the game is designed to basically have any amount of a shmup, a top-down twin-stick shooter, or a 3D action game, any of those gameplay elements in play at one time. And it's a very enjoyable experience, and when playing casually, it certainly catches you off guard and makes you think a little outside the box in terms of how we play games, which is very nice, and a very nice touch. These two enemies here are the same. We call them fidget spinners. Fortunately, they gave Gusia good RNG. If they were to do a spinning attack very, very quickly, then they wouldn't die as quickly as we would want them to. So as we come flying down to the surface here, we see that it's a very barren and overgrown city area that we encounter. The color palette actually may seem a little dull and gray, but I think it was actually a design element from the developers to make the city area a little dull, but also a little sort of intriguing and warming to the player. But either way, we're making our way here to the Resistance camp. These androids on the surface have been staying here on the surface for the purposes of the war, and us as 2B and 9S are newer models, so we're having to visit them and do monotonous side quests. Like this guy. The weapons trader and supply trader quests are necessary, I believe? Yes. Are necessary to complete this main quest, where the game just sort of shows you how to do side quests if you're unfamiliar with the concept.
Target location data obtained. Marking on map.
There are a couple faster movement options that we have available to us.
This must have been quite a city once upon a time.
So what Gusia is doing to get around the world here, he's performing a dash. And you'll see later throughout the run that we'll be doing
It's time for your regular
what are called dash
This
heavies.
is 2B. Nothing to report.
Good to hear.
Unfortunately, they're not. Dash heavies are not
It's fine.
optimal to use when our sword has a slower attack speed. So once we complete this weapons trader quest, we'll be able to upgrade our sword.
This has no bearing on completing missions.
We'll have enough money and we'll have enough materials
Let's get these back to the train.
to upgrade the sword to a faster attack speed.
Plant life has claimed most of the central area. Big plants too.
A bit of an interesting movement there. Another ability that our pod has, the little Gatling gun at our shoulder has, is the ability to slow down the enemies around 2B and 9S, but not actually slow down their movements.
Okay.
Their movements being the androids. So what we're able to do is basically cycle our pod program to be charging as if we were to fire it, slowing down time, but keeping the player character's speed about the same. So in fact, we end up slowing down enemy attacks with it, and it's very useful in higher difficulties, and it's very useful in many sections throughout the game. Just takes a lot of practice to pull off, as with everything. So right here, we're upgrading our sword, so that way it gains the faster attack speed that we want. That will effectively increase our DPS. So now that we've finished all these fetch quests, we're able to continue throughout the run.
42 to operator. Coordinates confirmed for location specified by resistance leader.
Understood.
So the movement that Gusia is now performing is called a dash heavy,
Efforts difficult, 2B.
performed by doing a dash move and a heavy attack. Soon after, it's a little tricky to perform if we're not paying attention to the timing of it. It looks like the animation in which the dash heavy can occupy is a little bit long, so I think he's canceling a little bit heavy, but that's just my opinion. You notice there that if we have an enemy in our camera for too long, there's an auto lock-on feature that 2B has, or 2B and 9S have, as just a feature of the game to automatically lock on to a machine nearby and effectively taking us off the path that we actually want, and unfortunately causing a little bit of zigzag if we're not careful. So sometimes you'll see runners reposition their camera to not look at enemies, or look at the floor, or look at the sky.
Get an accurate picture from this.
You'll notice the buys that he did here. He bought a couple attack buffs, he bought a couple recovery buffs,
Is good enough.
and
You don't let any
one specific, or two specific ones that he picked up were a animal sachet and some animal bait, and a plug-in chip called Resilience. Those allow us to ride animals, and the plug-in chip allows us to not cause a stagger if 2B is taking too much damage. Normally, if you were to get hit by an enemy, that causes a lot of stagger for 2B.
It's a sealed gate with explosives.
So we're moving fairly quickly through the desert area here. Some of the movement that you saw at the beginning, next to the vending machine, there all the way back at the beginning of the desert area, was an interesting trick found by yours truly, and it circumvents having to move around through the rest of the desert area, originally found by Marky. A lot of these tricks have been found by Marky,
Sure is slippery.
and in the community, and he is beloved for that. Some of the movement that you saw there, instead of having to talk to an NPC, which is significantly slower than just running straight on through, there's a barricade that we can't run through. So in order to open the barricade, we could talk to the NPC, but talking to an NPC is quite slow. So we just decide to clip right through it. And using some of the rock geometry, we're able to do that. And using that same out of bounds, we could have skipped what's called a discovery cutscene as we had approached this opening desert area. It's a little bit tricky to pull off as the floor in the out of bounds area is quite small. One of the things that we did pick up in the desert area here was an extra pod. You saw it laying on the floor in the sand, and unfortunately...
It's heading for that rocky area.
Okay. So as we move into this next area, this curious machine that we see here, when he's attacking just normally, he sometimes doesn't... he's a quest bot that triggers this next area, and the timing on which is that we want him to go into the sand and transport to the area that he's supposed to be in order to get the trigger and continue this area. But what we're able to do is manipulate some of the physics on some of these rocks and perform a plunge that pushes us all the way to the end of that little tunnel, or cave rather, and move us a little bit farther ahead than we otherwise normally would. Some of this movement here is called the desert housing skip. We end up clipping out in one of these apartment buildings. The floor is rather unclear here. The camera is awfully messy. So what Gusia is doing, he's picking up a trigger here, and he's voiding out to the bottom of the map. It looks like he's taking a little bit of extra time here. So you'll notice on the mini-map that the trigger has now moved over to this pit, where now he needs to get onto this platform at the very bottom of the pit, and now he can continue through to this fight. That whole trick saves about 30 to 40 seconds of having to wait through a number of other cutscenes. Little mini short cutscenes, but the movement required for the desert housing skip is rather demanding, just because the camera is rather messy with how the out of bounds works in that area. So as we come into this area, we come and storm into a robot party, if you could say. You learn more about this as we play the game, but for the purposes of the speedrun, we're just trying to kill as many things as possible here. A lot of the RNG involved in the run comes from this fight, so trying to get critical attack chips that increase our damage significantly is very crucial in this fight. You'll notice that a couple of the enemies have this red glow to their round head. That effect is enabled by spamming the flashlight button, and For unknown reasons, it's not entirely explained in the game, but it is explained once you play through the game at a later point. But it basically increases our damage for about, I think, 50% or so. So as we go into this fight, this boss is called Adam, as he was born from the machines, as we found out. And what Gusia did just there in his menus, he switched out a weapon set to be the same weapon set as his current one. So the game allows you to do this, naturally. And now he has two weapon sets, where in his light attack he has his bare fist, and his heavy attack is the short sword in both slots. And what he's able to do is throw a damage glitch, switch weapon sets, throw another damage glitch, and repeat. So effectively, we're increasing our damage per second by a significant amount. And it looks like Adam's giving him a little bit of trouble here. There we go. Some of the RNG involved with Adam is very stingy. If you're not able to take down Adam between his phases fast enough, he just becomes a real nuisance in terms of his attacks. So now that we've killed Adam, this sand pit that we're in is starting to fall apart, so we need to get out of here and move on.
Looks like we're safe now.
What the hell just happened?
I know. I've never seen a machine like that before. We better report this to command. Let's move to an area with better reception so we can contact.
So a lot of you may remember the self-destruct ability. We utilize it in the Atom Pit to kill a lot of machines, but also, as a side result, we end up losing 2B's skirt. A real crowd pleaser. Now, the trick that we're trying to do here is called Swag Box Skip. You'll remember that we picked up the transporter at the beginning of the desert area. Unfortunately, Gusia didn't get it this time. There's a clip that we're able to do next to that box by shoving 2B into the box, literally, and dashing to the side to then clip out of the map geometry. We're able to skip the dialogue that Gusia has triggered right now, and we're able to save and then load from out of bounds to then reload the same save at that save point. And that save point is all the way at the beginning of this desert area. So effectively, we're moving faster for the purposes of getting out of the desert area as fast as possible.
Operator to 9S. Data upload complete.
So the movement options here
From the commander. Initiating playback.
is very interesting. Where
2B, 9S. We've lost contact with several.
we're able to choose at least the pathing very liberally in terms of where 2B should be going in relation to the quest. So what we're able to do is climb over this route, getting in a little bit of speed just by plunging at the very end. That gains a little bit of speed. It doesn't save too much time, but in general, having to plunge in an area is usually faster than not having to plunge and just walk all the way through. Plunges are very, very quick movements that go down diagonally, and we use a lot of plunges for a fair amount of these clips.
There's no point trying to work out unsolvable problems.
So there was a little bit of interesting movement there. Oh boy. So what Gutsy is trying to do here is get off the ladder at a certain point. He unfortunately messed it up and got it, so 2B was right at the very cusp of that of the manhole. Usually you're able to get out of the manhole a little bit faster. And the movement that we're doing here performs what's called amusement park discovery skip. So we're able to double lift off of that tree root and skip about 5 seconds worth of a cutscene or so. And coming up here, we have Let's Play Skip. It's a little bit tricky, this one, as the strategy that Gusia is using is included if you have the DLC, where that elevator is mysteriously there. So we're able to clip out in the geometry of those two buildings with a plunge, and we're able to stand on top of that elevator. It's also able to be performed without the DLC. The strategy for the two differs a little bit, but not too much. And we're able to pick up the trigger out of bounds necessary in order to complete the area.
Analysis. It is a device that propels humans on rails at high speed.
And now comes everybody's favorite part, the roller coaster. It's a nice break in the run. It's about 30 to 40 seconds worth of just downtime and auto-scroller. There are a couple enemies that spawn, but they're no real big deal.
Yes.
People who know me well usually call me Nines. So what do you think? I mean, if you want to call me Nines, it's totally okay.
Coming up here, we have probably one of the more beautiful fights in NieR Automata, where you probably saw it in a lot of the marketing material. This one is called Beauvoir. You'll notice as when Gusia enters the boss room, why it's so enjoyable. The color scheme, at least for it, and the boss design is very, at least I believe, it's very thorough and very thought out.
Alert. Multiple
It's very well designed in general. So as we come into the theater, Beauvoir, a beautiful lady machine, or so we think.
What the hell?
So as she disengages from the stage, we're able to take these attack buffs that we've been holding on to. Every time we want to be damaging a boss, we want to be having these buffs active. So we got caught there for a little bit there. So if we're able to damage Beauvoir fast enough, her attack that she chooses, fortunately she chose the right attack for Gusia. If we damage her too quickly, then sometimes she will just choose a regular attack of hers, usually losing time, despite how quickly you damage the boss. If you were to damage her too quickly. Fortunately, Gusia performed that correctly, so no problems there. Here, we're discovering all these android bodies that Beauvoir has been hoarding, and the worst thing that can happen in this section is if we get hacked unnecessarily. These almost crucifixes for the machines, or for these android bodies, shoot out these hacking beams and these hacking shockwaves that cause us to, on average, lose about 6 to 8 seconds per hack, per unnecessary hack. There is one that is required. We saw that at the beginning of the fight. So as we kill all of those android bodies, Beauvoir moves back off stage, and we're able to damage her into her final phase. Don't blink or you'll miss it. As promptly named by Marble Soda,
saturation attack.
Beauvoir pulls out her underskirt.
Thanks for the assist.
Oh, I think they were only...
So you'll notice that Gusia
So,
managed to pull off a self-destruct at the end of that
some
boss.
weird things to say, huh?
What the purposes of that is so that way
Don't have feelings.
we don't have to deal with the animation of having to SD afterwards. There's a very long period of having to slow walk for having SD'd. As well, you're put on 1 health. And we're going to utilize that
It does seem, but
for the purposes of performing a death warp later on. Or not too later on. So that machine that we came across at the end of as we were coming out of the theater there, he's an advocate for peace, for a nearby peaceful village. And so we're going to that village right now, along this 2D pathway. Again, as I mentioned, NieR Automata is not afraid to put you into perspectives that you're not always comfortable with. That was some interesting movement going across that bridge there.
theories about that. But
I don't think I've seen that before.
tell what an alien is thinking, you know?
So as we come into Pascal's village, everybody's waving a white flag. And we come into the second fetch quest
Don't want to fight.
as the main quest, where Pascal gives us some material that we have to take back to the resistance camp, and then we have to come back to Pascal's village to tell Pascal that we've delivered the package. Now, the purposes of picking up that save point there, we want to quick save there, so that way when we make it to the resistance camp, we can deliver the package to the quest giver at the resistance camp, and then death warp all the way back to Pascal's village and manipulate the way that the quest system works, in that even though we died, we still complete the quest, and we can then talk to Pascal afterwards. Although, in order to perform this, we need an animal to kill us relatively quickly. Unfortunately, he got a little bit bad already on some of these animals. They're very stingy, and their turn radius is rather interesting. Gutsy is opting to show off some of the boar sliding. Some of you may remember from NieR Gestalt that boars are very quickly, or very fast when they slide. Unfortunately, it's not the same in NieR Automata, but they're still fun nonetheless. So there was the possibility of taking a little bit faster pathing through that area. We're just trying to get to the resistance camp as fast as possible. And we're going to let Boris the Boar kill us here, allowing us to turn in the quest at the resistance camp, die, and then talk to Pascal in order to complete the quest. So as we turn in this quest from Pascal, conveniently, there's an attack on the city center by these giant machines that we remember facing in the prologue.
A Goliath? This was a trap. knew it.
Again, some of this pathing through this area can be
Not aware of this information.
2B.
very
Command is deploying
optimized.
new flight units for us.
Unfortunately,
Set the coordinates, so let's get going.
sometimes we are all led to zigzag through this area, I myself included. A lot of the time save in NieR Automata comes from mostly combat optimizations and movement optimizations, as with most games. And
Probably shouldn't get near that guy's feet. Yeah, no.
unfortunately, it plagues every player. Most of us, at least. So we just passed by the foot of one of these Engels machines in City. There's another one in foreground. We're going to be passing between his legs.
We should be careful.
And the trick coming up here at the top of the building that we're going to be climbing is a little tricky. The way that that boss arena is designed is so that way the angles that we just passed underneath will turn his attention to us on the building, but in order for that to happen, Engels ends up smashing down one of the side walls of the building. But if we're quick enough, we're able to jump through... Oh, Gusia didn't get it this time, but we're able to jump through this tiny hole in the wall that seems rather simplistic, but it is actually rather difficult for some reason. The wall geometry works in such a way that there is that tiny little hole between each of the wall barriers and the invisible wall that spawns once Engels breaks down the wall. Fortunately, we're able to just high jump over the wall if we're unable to get through the hole, but obviously jumping through the hole is a little bit faster. Either way, we end up skipping that first Engels that we would be able to kill, or that we would be required to kill casually. So what we're able to do with this is hop in our flight suit and go over to the second Engels, kill the second Engels very quickly, and trigger the next area.
Yorha, this is your commander. For the first time in centuries, we've intercepted a signal belonging to the aliens.
And an interesting glitch that doesn't always get mentioned here is what's called Skype glitch, which is interesting because for some reason the interaction between the dialogue that Commander says as we get out of this flight unit
If we're lucky.
and cancel that dialogue with whatever 2B and 9S are saying as we enter this cave, it ends up giving this interesting glitch that allows the dialogue from any phone call that we get for the remainder of the run to trigger faster, and in many cases actually ends up speeding up a lot of these areas that require dialogue triggers or dialogue to finish. Unfortunately, it's only for phone calls, so for sections like negotiations here, where it's the characters talking face to face, it's unfortunately unaffected by Skype glitch. Skype glitch only affects dialogue blocks that require a phone call. So these two characters that we see here are Adam and Eve. There's a lot of biblical reference to them, obviously through their name, but for obvious reasons, Eve is a man in this character, or in Yoko Taro's interpretation, or the machine's interpretation. Depends on how you look at it. So what we're able to do here is we're able to kill Eve as fast as possible, and I think Gusia is going to show off the out of bounds in this area. But what we're able to do here is get a perfect dodge off of one of Eve's attacks and scale this holographic wall that's impossibly tall.
We have dedicated ourselves to
Ooh, he's having a little bit of trouble with it.
and now we will
It's a rather tricky high jump to get.
their image after all.
Assist you with what?
There we go.
We need you
So he's able to get outside of the playable area,
to us.
at least for the boss fight here, and he's able to do a series of high jumps with this very confusing camera angle. Because this area is circular, the camera will behave in a circular motion, and trying to get onto a pathway that is like the radius of a circle, it's rather difficult to get, at least in a straight line. The camera and control scheme here sort of messes with you. As you can see, the camera is clipping through the wall. And that whole section is based off of the dialogue from Adam, Eve, 2B, and 9S. So that section will only finish if each of their dialogue blocks will finish. Unfortunately, we haven't found a way to skip that dialogue,
Operator 6-0, we now have an operational training
at least
order.
in A ending. In a lot of the other categories, we end up quickening that process, but
Access to those.
the whole purpose of escaping negotiations was potentially clearing out this cave here full of enemies and allowing us to just quickly go from point A to point B here
Still, they're what?
without having to worry about a lot of the enemies. In other categories as well, there's a couple other tricks that we can be doing and a couple other materials to pick up there as well, but that's neither here nor there. So what we've unlocked here is the ability to transport to places. Where we're going right now is to talk with the commander
That
in
concludes our
the
report
bunker.
on the event of your this not under
And we're going to give her a report on some of the things that we've seen.
And now we have to go back to the city ruins.
There was a little bit of a dialogue skip that we could have done there. I think
rest if I feel like it.
Gusia opted to not go for it. It requires a little bit of RNG in terms of where 9S gets placed. I'm fairly certain, I'm not too sure where. So standard from going from talking to commander to going from commander in the bunker to Pascal's village here. I think Gusia chose the wrong warp option. Yeah, there we go. And we're able to just go from commander, talk to Pascal, and at least allowing us to transport to the different places in the world significantly speeds up some of the gameplay elements where a lot of some of the side quests per se have to go to all these different locations, and it really opens up the world and makes it a little bit easier to traverse, and we're going to be using that a little bit throughout the run.
Where
Coming up here is one of the shopping experiences, or rather one of the bigger shopping experiences. This is where we're going to get rid of some of our smaller buffs and make some money. We're also going to get rid of the HUD elements in terms of the plugin chips, because those elements like the minimap, those elements like hiding the controls or auto hiding controls or damage values, those are all unnecessary chips. So we're able to make some space here for, if you remember, we picked up the resilience chip, and unfortunately what we would normally equip at this point were some attack increases to 2B's ability. So I had mentioned in the Atom Pit, those enemies that we had killed in that section determine a little bit of the RNG in this run, where killing more enemies in that fight causes, or potentially causes, more of those attack chips to spawn, and thus giving us a greater chance at getting better plug-in chips. Unfortunately, Gusia has no attack increases, but in the long run, it doesn't entirely matter. It just makes the fights to come a little bit more difficult. The biggest increase in terms of our capability here is at least plugging in resilience, where as long as Gutsia's health is at 100%, or rather greater than 80% of his health, then he will not stagger. So 2B won't fall to the ground after getting hit and spend a couple seconds standing up. What we're performing here, we're entering the commercial facility, and we're able to skip one of the dialogues here via talking to 9S and walking into the dialogue trigger. So therefore we spawn in these medium bipeds a little faster than normal, just because those enemies have to wait until that dialogue is finished. So if the dialogue is completely truncated, then we can spawn in those enemies faster. Now Gusia is looking to check if he has more attack ups from those enemies that may have dropped. Unfortunately, he's going to have to finish the run without any attack chips, unfortunately. But as I said, attack chips only make the fights easier. They do help in terms of the damage output by a significant margin. At least having the ability to critical hit on enemies deals a very large chunk of damage, about 500%, or a chance to deal 500% damage on a single hit. And of course it's RNG as to when you critical hit, but at least having the greater critical hit chance makes boss fights significantly easier. So we're going through the forest area here. We're able to just sort of scale a lot of these rocks and a lot of the geometry using a lot of our movement options here. So we'll see crossing this bridge here, we take the least, or the path with least resistance. By far, the forest area is my favorite. The music in here is very nice and serene and surreal. It's so beautiful. So the reason why we're going down here is to form a little bit of a skip called Mario Kart skip. You'll know if you've played Mario racing games of any sort, that if you fall off the edge of the map, you'll get placed back on the track at a certain point. But what we're able to do is enter a new location to trick the game into thinking that we fell off at the top of the castle, whereas we had just come from outside the castle. So when we fall out into the water, we're able to go into the castle as if we had run all the way around, saving a little bit of time. And my personal favorite skip is Castle Skip, what you're seeing here. We're able to clip out of bounds by one of the tree roots in the courtyard of the castle, and conveniently we're able to scale these little windows on the side of the castle. You see them in the background. And it looks like Gusia missed one of the triggers there. I think he got it no matter what. Those enemies usually spawn in when the trigger is hit. So it looks like he double backed and just made sure that he was 100% in getting the trigger there. There is a strategy here to get a shorter walk up to this little crib,
Is the...
because having 2B and 9S slowly walk into the trigger wastes about 10 seconds or so. That was a fairly long walk up that Gusia got there.
Annihilation?
And the more time that occupies,
Let's go,
the worse.
2B!
So we're able to jump directly onto the cradle there. Now this boss, A2, is another android that we find in the world, and without spoiling the rest of the game, we at least defeat A2 here, and this fight is a little tricky without any sort of damage ups, just because A2 hits for very fast attacks. Her light attack is very quick, her heavy attack hits really, really hard. So if you're unprepared for it, she can definitely catch you off guard, and having resilience really, really helps. So normally we would have to chase A2 out the window there, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to escape the boss room and scale one of these invisible walls at the back of the arena and transport back to Pascal's village to turn in the quest. You'll notice that the entire castle section, as we had been climbing through it and fighting A2, it's all in this 2D space, and it's very well executed with how it seamlessly transitions between a 3D experience to a 2D experience in like this side-scroller sort of way, which is really intriguing and very good use of the game mechanics on Platinum's part. So, fortunately, Gusia was able to get behind Pascal here and access that chest. It's a little bit of a safety strat. Some runners choose to pick up that item in that chest. Some runners opt to not bother with it. That item in particular allows our program to regenerate its cooldown a little bit faster. So we're able to use that in a couple sections. Mostly it's for the final fight.
9S, why did you ask Pascal about A2?
And we're coming up to everybody's favorite part in NieR Automata pretty soon here.
Still, machines are the enemy. Don't forget it. Oh,
Or rather, every runner's least favorite part of the run, mostly because it's about a 12-minute section of flight unit combat. The clip that you saw just here was a clip that allows us to get outside of the resistance camp area. Ooh. And under normal circumstances, you're able to get out under the trigger area for that discovery cutscene for the flooded city, completely out of bounds. It's a little bit tricky to get because the trigger volume for it is rather small when it's under the map, so it's very, very precise in terms of some of the movement that you have to perform. And because we're approaching from the other side completely out of bounds, it's a little difficult to see where the ground is out of bounds, because the floor in the out of bounds area between the flooded city and the resistance camp is actually loaded in. So all of that area you could walk on, with some areas that are without clipping. But unfortunately, Gusia went back in bounds at the wrong opportunity and had to scale the flooded city, at least inbounds. There is a way of getting to this location here that he's fighting these machines at, completely out of bounds.
I think that's the last of the machines.
So once we're able to defeat all those enemies, we can skip the dialogue that comes from 9S and the commander to spawn in our flight units. And now, entering one of probably the longest section of the run. This whole section is in a flight unit, and at least in this beginning part, it's still determined by how fast you kill these enemies, but in the later section of this flight unit area is determined by just being an auto-scroller. So, because we have the time here, I'd like to remind everybody, if you're joining us right now, that the AFM Telethon is a yearly charity event that takes place in France, raising money for the French Association for Muscular Dystrophy, and on this occasion, multiple French cities organize charity events for the AFM. The telethon has been going on for over 30 years, and each year raising around 90 million euros, much of which is raised during this two-day event taking place all over France and the French territory. Bourg La Run is a charity speedrunning marathon for the telethon that takes place in the town of Bourg La Run in France, where we're running an awesome collection of games as fast as possible all weekend, with dozens of players gathered together as one community to accomplish this. If you're watching this a little bit late, or on a VOD, or if you missed the telethon, but still wish to donate, you can still do so all year round on the AFM site, or you can sign up for monthly donations. More information is on their website. Use the command !BLR, or search for AFM Telethon, or go to afm-telethon.com. There is an English version of their website as well. And also, we have a ton of incentives for many of the runs later to come during this marathon. I see Sonic the Hedgehog has a bonus run for Green Hill blindfolded on the way. That seems very interesting. I'd love to see that. Bugs Bunny and Taz, Time Busters, has a bonus any % run as well. In Spyro 2, Spyro's color is up for grabs for any color you desire. Almost any color. And there's a good number of incentives as well. I recommend checking if you're interested in leaving a donation. At least in the BLR run, or marathon today, we've raised so far 3,315 euros, as you can see in the bottom right of the screen. And if you look in, again, under that total, the total amount for the AFM Telethon that has raised is a fairly significant amount. That's a huge amount. So, thank you very much to everybody who has left a donation throughout the marathon, and as well to all the runners who have run this marathon. It's very talented. All these talented people who have come together to play these awesome games for you guys, for a good cause as well. So big props to them, and as well the organizers as well. At least for setting up the BLR stream as well as the English restream. Thank you. We have a little bit of time to relax here as Grun, this giant machine, has emerged from
Upon reaching
the
land,
deep sea,
unleashed a devastating electromagnetic
and
wave attack. All resistance fighters
unfortunately a lot of this section is auto-scroller,
This thing reaches land.
so we're just waiting for each of these waves to spawn in, as Gusia swiftly takes them out in his flight suit. The speed at which we take these guys out doesn't particularly matter. As long as we're killing them fast enough, the auto-scroller still performs as it should. So Grun is often considered a very good time for just relaxing during the run. Coming up here, we have the first little mini-boss, or the second little mini-boss in this flight unit section, where on this core, we have to defeat these 4 little yellow balls in order to take out the shield on this final core. And it looks like Gusia got a little bit good RNG. Sometimes those cores can turn in the incorrect fashion, sometimes not allowing you to damage them correctly.
Preparing for satellite laser strike.
Oh, come on! It's got an electromagnetic barrier over its whole body?
Having trouble.
Now, sometimes when you skip that cutscene that we had just saw with the laser coming from the sky, from an orbital base from the androids, sometimes if you skip that cutscene fast enough, you can get a really funky
Lead this area to the reinforced
camera
base. I
angle,
have an idea.
at least when we were fighting those machines that spawn around us. Which is always amusing to see how skipping a cutscene too quickly sometimes causes that.
Lining the shoreline here. All the EMP shielding in the world won't help against close-range mortar fire.
Got it.
Close range mortar fire, 9S. Now, we often think that 9S is a very smart individual, but with him pointing out that close range mortar fire is necessary to take out Grun,
Armor is too thick.
you'll notice that when we're in the gunner's seat, or this cannon that we're sitting in, it says rail cannon unit.
That's right.
And it's always perplexed us as runners, because why would 9S say long range mortar or close range mortar fire, but what the hell. Whatever you say, 9S. Whatever you say.
That enormous machine.
We'll always believe you.
It was designed to help annihilate the androids, but it wound up going out of control. I was part of the machine's network when it happened, so I remember it. The moment it reached land, it went berserk and began attacking everything in sight. No one could figure out how to stop it. They eventually marooned it deep in the ocean, but it seems to be searching for a way back. Huh.
Hey, 2B, I think I have another idea. You keep that thing right where it is, okay?
What?
Please, 2B, this is gonna work.
So, as 9S is abandoning us, unfortunately, or rather fortunately, we're able to not always worry about having 9S steal a lot of the experience gains from each of these enemies that we kill here. Albeit there's a set number of enemies remaining
If we can use those missiles back
that can spawn, but fortunately, with 9S gone, we don't have to worry about him stealing any of our kills. However small, it still helps in our overall experience gain. And for such a big machine, Grun has always been hiding, at least in the lore of the game, in the ocean, and you'll find out that through some of the in-game dialogue that this gargantuan machine was simply hiding in the ocean for so long, for centuries. Here is another one of the mini-bosses throughout Grun. This time you'll notice it's in a different perspective as before. A little bit... oh, we still got good RNG. Unfortunately, if Gusia was a little bit fast enough, he could have killed 2 sets of those yellow balls in one succession, so that way it would only take 2 turns total to kill each of those 4 balls. There are a couple strategies that we can use there to quicken that process and to make it a little more consistent. But overall, this section is very, very much the same. Time doesn't necessarily differ too much between runs in this section. It's very auto-scrolly. Most runners like it for having the time to have a break, sort of relax during this section, but for a lot of runners as well, very monotonous. The elusive Grun skip, as we've dubbed it, will always forever be hidden from us, as attempting to skip this section has not been found, or attempting to skip this section has not been found. Finally, we're coming up to the final core on Grun's back. Ooh, unfortunately, this is just taking an extra round there just to be certain of killing that. As I said before, killing each of these cores doesn't add on too much time, but it does add a couple seconds throughout the run if the core doesn't die as fast as we want it to. So now that we're done with this section, things are going to start moving a little bit faster in terms of the boss fights. So in the story, we see that Grun is destroyed via 9S's missile.
Never mind that. I need a status report.
Interpret that your own way. And what we're able to do with some of the voiding out in the water in the flooded city is similar to the Mario Kart skip, to trick the game into placing us into an area that normally we wouldn't be able to drown warp to, in a sense, placing us a little bit farther ahead than where we would be if we had just walked normally. Coming up here is the infamous Copied City skip, or Copied City clip, rather, and in essence is a very precise skip in nature. The meshes between this cave wall here is rather precise in order to clip through, and since SGDQ, we've devised a little bit rough there. We've devised a little bit of an easier strategy using mouse and keyboard to clip through the wall with a very precise angle that allows us to consistently hit that, despite being very precise. Trying to move forward in a perfect fashion on a joystick, on the controller, is rather tough, and at least using a keyboard and mouse, you're able to hold forward and heavy attack directly, or heavy hold, as we call it, directly through the wall at the precise angle that we need, making it significantly easier and way more consistent.
The enemy must have placed them here deliberately.
So here we come into another boss fight. This is, again, as we've seen before, Adam. Although he's a little bit different. He's come into this area and sort of made a world of his own. Here, if you remember from S2DQ, we had to wait for the dialogue to pass before fighting the boss, but what we're able to do is clip over this box, and using the force that 2B pushes down on, we skid ourselves out of the map on the precise angle needed and clip out of the boss area. And there is a little bit faster of a clip there. Gusia took a couple attempts to clip out of the boss area. Not too big of a deal, but we're able to skip about 50 seconds worth of dialogue as Adam explains his grand master plan of dissecting humans and dissecting androids and becoming human. Now that we've skipped that dialogue, we warp right back into the boss arena, and we're able to fight Adam himself. The large dialogue chunk that we skip there, that skip itself is called mansplaining, discovered, I believe, by Marky. And Adam has a couple phases here. What we just saw there was a damage threshold to start some dialogue. From there, once we get Adam to a certain threshold, he finishes his dialogue, and now the real boss fight starts, where we're able to kill him. And it looks like Gusia is running into a little bit of trouble here. Oh boy. So Adam's attack patterns here are rather interesting and very fast-paced. His attacks are much quicker than we had seen in previous attempts, or in previous occurrences at in the desert and in the alien mothership. So coming up here, we have a little bit of a dialogue skip using this computer girl. If we were to walk away from the quest giver too quickly, we would trigger this long dialogue that causes us to change up a little bit of our strategy here. Fortunately, Gusia got the dialogue skip, and he's able to pick up these items that allow a faster cooldown to come on our pod program when we end up using it in the final fight.
Hello, 2B. Do you need something?
I need to know if you've seen
So some of this movement here is a little bit different. He ended up reading the mail in the resistance camp that we need to trigger the next quest. So as this dialogue plays, we run through the city ruins. If you remember in SGDQ, this movement was a little bit different.
if that's what they want.
A little bit of routing has changed since then, but not too much. The gist is about the same.
Indeed. Apparently it's located in the abandoned factory. I can give you the coordinates if you'd like.
The plaguing of auto lock-on always messing with our movement in a lot of these sections when we're having to dash heavy through packs of enemies. If our camera is not aligned precisely how we want it, sometimes that auto lock-on will pull us off the path that we want to take. Wasting a little bit of time, but it's no big deal in the long run. So coming up here, there's a little bit of a slow walk section as we wait for Pascal to finish her dialogue.
Now that we're cut off from the network, we
There is supposedly a strategy that allows us to move a little bit faster using 2B's Easter egg. If you've played the game, you know what I mean. It's a little bit of a fun trick as we slow walk into this area. So here, in the factory, wherein most things are made, in most of these machines that are made, the machines that have hid out in this area have created a form of religion, surprisingly. And Gusia, taking the time to remove 2B's skirt, 2 booty % has been achieved. As we like to call it. So here we're just waiting for that
Why are you still here?
that machine to press the button on the elevator. He's really slow, and unfortunately we have to wait for him to press the button on the elevator in order to progress. And so coming up here, we begin to see how strange this religion is starting to be, with how the torches and the fire act as sort of a not so warm welcome.
Damn it!
I was right. This is shady. Fascinating, though.
So suddenly, these machines that we thought were peaceful suddenly turn on us, and we have a mob after us, and fortunately we have the tool to just decimate these waves of enemies.
We need an immediate escape route.
The idea here is to at least kill a good number of these enemies. We're not entirely sure how many we need to kill, but we just need to kill a bunch of them. You can usually tell how fast you're killing them by how much dialogue passes in between. So once we've killed enough machines here, we have access to this elevator that spawns. All the while these machines are chasing us. Pascal fortunately got in the elevator fast enough, and here is one of the more precise skips and more effective skips in the run, known as Deep Factory Skip, found by Marky. Why is the... okay. Normally that elevator door is supposed to close. So the idea here is that we're trying to clip out of this room, there we go, and void out to the bottom of the map. That ends up resetting the instance of this area. So this elevator, which would normally lock if we leave the area that the elevator is supposed to deactivate from. So if we leave that area, the elevator completely locks up. We aren't able to go up to this room that we were just in. So now that we're back in this room, we're able to clip out again onto this beam here, and we're able to progress through the factory via collecting some of the triggers that are necessary throughout the factory itself. It's a little bit tricky with how you have to time your self-destructibility to not cause a belly flop animation. Nice, there we go. And he's able to fall down far enough to trick the game into thinking that he's falling to nothingness. And so if he stays in the air long enough, he's able to void back up to the top of that area, and he's able to get the trigger in the area that he's falling down to. So if he falls close enough to the door below that area, he's able to progress he's able to get the trigger that's required to continue through the factory and progress this area, which is very nice and saves about a minute 40, I believe, a minute 45 of time instead of having to run all the way through, being about one shots from these crushing environment hazards, as most runners are all too familiar with. So this is another one of the bosses. We're coming into a little bit of a boss. Soshi, in this fight here, normally we'd be able to get one of these clips and just hang out on one of these bridges that allows us to just keep out of the way from Soshi and have him look at us like a cat looks at a mouse from high above, ready to pounce on our prey. So, but we're still able to avoid Soshi's attacks here. It's just a little bit more effort on the runner's part to avoid them. So now that we've waited for the dialogue to finish, we're able to damage the boss. Gusia has opted to break one of Soshi's legs in order to get free damage on him, as Soshi takes his time getting back up after having been staggered. And there we are. Overall, a very clean fight. There is a faster way to do it, using a combination of slow-mo from our pod program and obviously using the double damage exploit, as we've been using the entire length of the run. By switching between each of our weapon sets, we increase our damage significantly in this section in particular. Fighting each of these bosses is rather time-consuming if they don't die quickly, so our goal is to kill them as fast as possible. Again, this movement here, you'll remember from the prologue, where we're able to circumvent a lot of these arenas here by clipping out of bounds, and there's a little bit of an interesting camera angle there. Unfortunately, Gusia clipped right back in bounds, so he's going to have to run the length of the factory inbounds, but that's okay. If you remember from the prologue, we would be able to do the same general movement through this area. It's a little bit tricky though, because auto lock-on really messes with the character in how 2B wants to attack the enemies that are normally out of bounds to the player. And because we're trying to do a specific attack to get out of bounds, it sometimes causes 2B to fall into the lava down below, unlike in Prologue where there are no enemies, because we've despawned them all.
I'm not receiving.
Scanning for interference.
The
There was some interesting movement coming down those steps out of the factory.
Let's move.
I believe Canaris, the world record holder for a ending any percent, had devised a similar sort of movement.
Increasing like this.
Cause unknown.
Try contacting the bunker via laser relay system.
So as we run through these machines, we've noticed that there's a lot more machines in these areas, and they have a new sort of area of effect ability with electricity that we come across in this area and the rest of the city ruins. And to our knowledge, when we come back to the resistance camp, we see that it's all on fire. It's all burning.
2B! They came. Good luck.
And these machines have ransacked the resistance camp, and we need to clear them out as fast as possible. So a lot of runners really like this fight because it's all side-scroller and you don't need to worry too much about positioning. I've always had difficulty with the fight here and trying to get it as fast as I can, or as fast as possible, to clear out all these machines here. But it's a very easy fight in that you can just go as hard as you can on the double damage exploit and really make use of that extra DPS that we get. So at the very end here, Gusia is going to have to rebuff, and I believe... Okay. So once we take out that final big guy at the very end of that tunnel, we come out to the quest giver that we've been seeing in the resistance camp, and we continue to the next boss, just out here, Bokushi. Bokushi has an interesting trick up his sleeve. He has electricity in the water. And fortunately for us, with the help of resilience, we were able to completely circumvent the electricity by just getting hit by it and having it not stagger us. So once we get Bokushi to his damage threshold, we're able to see him transition into his ball form, which is sometimes a little stingy in the RNG and attack patterns that Bokushi chooses. So once Bokushi does this vacuum effect on the player, we know that the boss fight is done, and we go right into the next boss, Core 1. Core 1 is really sort of simplistic. If we pull him up onto this hill here, where a lot of his attacks don't really hit us, and our double damage exploit is really effective here because we can usually take him down as fast as we possibly can. So you'll see that Gusia is level 19 here. He should have enough XP to get him to level 20. The differences between levels doesn't entirely matter, but it does help for a little bit of extra damage output on the final boss. So coming across the city ruins here, we're coming up to Core 2, which is a little bit different to Core 1 that we had just fought. This one is flying after we fight these enemies that are harassing Pascal.
Damn it! They're here too!
Nina! It seems the machines on the network have gone berserk. They've sealed off the entrance to the village and are trying to hold them off. But with these weapons, there's only so much we can do.
Let's take these guys out first.
Now I believe we have met the incentive for the bonus boss at the end of this NieR Automata run. I believe we're sitting at 160 euros out of 200 euros. I believe we'll be seeing the results of that at the end of this run, but if not, or if you're feeling generous, it's a very funny boss fight.
Location has been detected and placed on map.
We'll take care of Eve.
You just worry about keeping the village safe, okay?
Do be careful.
So we're coming up to the end of the any percent here, going down into the final boss fight here. The fight is broken up into 4 phases. Everything must die. So, Eve phase 1 here, he's on the ground, and we just want to deal as much damage as we can as fast as possible here, because there's a certain threshold in his health that where he chooses this attack known as platforms, and unfortunately Gusia didn't make the threshold as fast as he wanted to, but it looks like Eve decided to stop doing platforms.
The energy seems to be coming from a large number of
Maybe Eve was feeling generous.
He's absorbing the life force.
Sometimes the damage threshold on that is really iffy. Sometimes Eve gets up there with almost no HP to go through the threshold, so the game is confused as to why the enemy even went into that attack sometimes. It's not an exact science. So here, we're just trying to get more damage on Eve phase 2 here. And there we are. Going into Eve phase 3. He's now flying, and even more angry than before. So here we're able to use a little bit of our air for extra damage if Gusia opts to use it. But we're also able to use the skill salves, the extra fast cooldowns that we're able to use on our pod program. And with the help of resilience, we're able to mitigate a lot of the staggering effects that Eve imposes on us by spamming us with attacks and really hitting us very hard in a lot of situations. So it looks like Gusia is opting to just use ranged attack. He can get a little bit more damage on Eve with attacking with his sword, but attacking Eve with his laser and his ranged attacks is still a good strategy in most cases. So now we're transitioning into Eve phase 4. Here we're slow walking because Eve has dealt a tremendous amount of damage to us, and this section is also really sort of dependent on RNG in terms of the attacks that Eve chooses. Sometimes he stays in one place the entire time, sometimes he really flies around all over the place. And there we are, coming up to the very end of the run here. Once this cutscene triggers at the end of this dialogue, will be time.
This corrupted data to the bunker. So
9S.
Overall, a very solid run.
please, Tubi. I want you
Nice, there we go.
for me.
GG. Very solid run overall. I believe we still have some time for the incentive for NieR Automata. If not, then up next should be Stepmania, Superplay run by Bumpino. I believe we're loading into the incentive here for NieR Automata. And it looks like it's a go. Getting a little bit of interesting feedback here. It looks like the game's giving him a little bit of problems here. Just bear with him. The problems of having a PC port that may or may not work is a problem that many PC runners have, and many PC players have with this game. Fortunately, there have been community mods, or a community mod made for optimizing the game to a playable state, and at least makes it so that way many people can have access to the game. It's different for everybody, and there's always instances of the game not cooperating. But it looks like we're loading into the DLC CEO boss. As far as I know, the DLC boss is an interesting one where once you complete one of the DLC arenas to the fullest extent, you're able to talk with this character who spawns in the arena and coerce them into letting you fight somebody who you wouldn't really expect to see in a game like this. So, just getting down to the Flooded City, Gusia is going to use the Flooded City skip, as we had seen before Groom. Conveniently, the Flooded City is directly below, or rather right next to, the Resistance Camp area, and we're able to go into the Flooded City Arena, available through the DLC. Craigasm in the chat for the Kaine outfit. So, coming up to the top of this arena, we're able to talk with this person to fight you-know-who. Who is you-know-who? I don't know, I mean... My immersion? Wait a minute. But I don't want to break my immersion. Wait, what? I mean... Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Masuda. And his trusty sidekick. Mr. Sato. Oh man. They pack a punch. Jeez. And as in standard ridiculousness. It's a very funny fight. And they leave us with a parting gift as beloved developers and publisher CEOs. Well, thank you to everybody who stopped by for the NieR Automata Any Percent speedrun by Gusia. I have been your commentator, Ethereum. Definitely check out NieR Automata if you haven't played it yourself. It's a very fun speed game. It's a very fun casual game. Deep set in its lore. I love it. It's an amazing game. Coming up next, we have Stepmania, Super Play by Bumfino. Reminder that